Welcome to Watersports World for another hour of action-packed entertainment. This week we'll be bringing you a special report showing you all the action, colour and excitement from Britain's and probably the world's toughest and most prestigious offshore powerboat race, the Allied Leisure Cowes Torquay Classic. Over 30 of the world's most famous and most successful offshore powerboat racers have gathered in Cowes with their eyes set firmly on this trophy. It's a tough endurance race of over 200 miles. Let's look first at some of the likely leading contenders. Cowes is packed once again for this very popular event. It's the only offshore powerboat race in the world to have run 31 years consecutively. It's also the penultimate round of the European Offshore Powerboat Championships, and Angelo Spelter here will have his work cut out to keep the lead that will bring him the trophy. It's his son who's chasing him hard in second place in the championships, but in this race it may well be last year's winner, Domenico Achilli, who will be giving him the most trouble.
This boat is faster than last boat year, and but obviously I hope to repeat the success of last year. Also, if I know that is very difficult because there are a lot of competitors very fast. But I think that my boat succeed in doing in this because it's one of the fastest boats. Maximum average of this boat, maximum speed is 125 miles, and I think if the sea will be friend of me, in this case will be flat, I think I succeed in doing a good performance.
And how's the season been going so far, the rest of the season?
But the rest of the season, my boat was not was still between the first three boats while racing. But I had a lot of troubles, and I didn't succeed in doing very well. Only in Rimini I succeeded in doing second behind Bagutta, but I think here in English water I'm used to do really a good races, and I hope for tomorrow that I can get some luck close to me, and I hope to repeat the success of last year.
Obviously it's a very long race, so is there any special tactics for a race this long?
Yeah, the only one problem is to stay with first while starting, because we are putting 1,500 liters of fuel, and we are very heavy, and we don't want to jump too much because to avoid to have some problems. And I think the tactic is to put all the accelerator only while coming back from Turkey. From Turkey to here, we can do the maximum, but while going to Turkey, I think it's better to save something for the engine.
Also in contention is likely to be probably the fastest boat in the circuit, that of millionaire businessman Edoardo Polli, but he's been having problems.
The boat basically the same of last year. It has 4 turbo engines in it. It was a very fast boat. Now we did some, better, things, and of course it doesn't run anymore. So it's, but we had to change the drives. We were breaking the drives all the time. So now we have Arneson drives and rudder behind it. But it's a brand new boat practically. So it's just been ready now for the first time. I tested it now for the first time, and it's all to be set up yet still. So it was running very slowly now. We hope to get something better together by tomorrow morning or by tonight.
Tell us a little bit about the layout in your boat, because obviously you've got a cockpit there.
Well, we have a closed cockpit as by regulation. We raced the same cockpit last year, really. It has proven itself very, very important. We stopped the boat once this year. We spun around once. We turned over once. So we have a long record this year of accidents, and we are here to tell you to you. So it means that this type of protection is very, very good, I think.
Polli runs the most expensive team in the world with 3 boats. The 2 others driven by his sons Leonardo, here in the diesel-powered Unipol Cat, and Vincenzo, who runs with Britain's most experienced offshore racer, throttleman Steve Curtis, in the Baguta boat. Steve now bases himself in Italy, where he can find the teams prepared to spend the money required for top-class racing.
It varies obviously from boat to boat, from team to team. For a proper Class 1 team to do a European budget, it costs around £1 million. But if you can get good sponsors, and obviously the further up the pole you are, the better sponsors you get.
Generally, safety-wise, I mean, obviously things have improved with boats are at higher speeds these days, but presumably safer.
Yeah, we're running the F-16 fighter canopies like all the Class 1 boats have to now, and it does make it a lot safer. Once you've had an accident, then you've got to worry about getting out of it, but at least you survive the accident, and that's the main concept behind it, that you survive the accident and then get out. Yeah, I've had a couple stuffs, but I'm still here, so obviously they work, and the boat got pretty beat up, and that's the idea, that everything around you can sort of cave in and you're okay sat in this little cocoon.
The most exciting new entry is that of Richard Carr, who offers the first serious British challenge to the Italians for many years. He commissioned an almost identical boat to Curtis, but doesn't have the advantage of the latest Lamborghini factory engines supplied exclusively to Baguta.
We've tested twice today. We've had a slight problem with one gearbox. It's a little bit of oil dripping out of it, so we're changing at the moment. We've got new engines in, and yeah, the boat's running very well. We're very heavy because it's a very long race, 230 miles. It's the most fuel we've ever carried. It's 1,400 litres of fuel, which weighs about 1 3/4. So the boat's, it's running well considering the amount of weight we've got on it. And this race, it'll probably take us till we get to about Portland Bill before we start to actually lighten up and start to get some speed back.
So what's the tactics in this particular race? What's the weather looking like, and what's sort of going through your mind at the moment?
The weather's looking very good. I mean, as you can see, it's very sunny. However, there's quite a strong westerly wind, which means that I think that in Lyme Bay tomorrow, if the wind's the same as it is today, it will be fairly choppy, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, because if the boat lift, the unfortunate thing is on the way back, the wind will be behind us, which means we won't get so much lift, and we'll be going with the sea rather than into it. But I'm fairly hopeful about tomorrow. I mean, we'll be taking it very steady. This race is more of an endurance race than the other races have been doing. This race is nearly 100 miles longer than normal. So, it's a matter of pacing yourself. We won't be going fast at the start. We'll be going very, very steady, and probably following 1 or 2 of the Italian boats or keeping with them, but not going charging off like I think a few of the other people will be doing.
Other leading contenders will be Norwegian Andreas Ugland in his very fast triple-engined monohull, Norberto Ferretti in his own Iceberg Ferretti catamaran, and Giulio Boffi in the Fratelli Rossetti catamaran, which has the reliability of diesel engines for this long race. Meanwhile, Edoardo Poli's first test session is proving money doesn't guarantee success. These rudder plates made of half-inch strengthened steel plate are supposed to be pointing straight down.
Evidently they are too weak, I mean, you know.
You didn't hit anything?
No, they are just bent by the hitting of the boat. I mean, if you hit something and it would break this way, they would not.
So there's that much pressure coming out of...
There is a hell of a lot of pressure, as you can see.
He's already under pressure to be ready for the race, but perhaps also under just as much pressure are the boats in the smaller classes. But perhaps most pressure of all is on the mechanics who have to prepare this expensive machinery.
It's taken a lot of hard work, basically. I mean, that's what it's all about, really. As far as today's concerned, to get it ready for tomorrow's race, we've had our share of niggly problems, gremlins, if you like. That's why we're still here now, and the sun's gone down. But I think we're now properly ready, properly prepared.
I mean, obviously it's been 6 months preparation, and how are you going to feel to tomorrow morning or tomorrow 11 o'clock when it...
Sick, probably. Tomorrow really is a big day for us here, and it's the first time we're up against the whole of Europe, the top boys in the world, really. Probably Steve is one of our biggest competitors, but we're going to have a go to beat them.
On race day, the Cowes streets are already busy as the race is prepared to start. A new start boat capable of over 50 knots will certainly be adding to the spectacle. First, though, let's look at the course. The Allied Leisure 1991 Cowes Classic starts, of course, in Cowes. The boat's heading off down the Solent towards the Needles, across and around Bournemouth Bay, and then on towards Portland Bill, where they start the 15-mile stretch across Lyme Bay, then searching for the gate at Brixham and Paynton, which they have to negotiate before turning north to Torquay, and then heading back across Lyme Bay, where they'll be tackling the rougher water, having lost the protection of the shoreline. Any error in navigation here could mean losing vital places in the high-speed convoy sprinting back towards the finish line. It's 190 nautical miles in all, and with speeds averaging over 90 miles per hour, they can expect to do it in just over 2 hours. The Cowes Express leads off the spectacular flotilla of Class 1 offshore powerboats ready for the start, with Marco Capaferri's orange Cyreg boat alongside Fratelli Rossetti, Iceberg alongside Steve Curtis in Baguta, Ugland's red monohull just waiting behind Polly's SDA boat, Angelo Spelter in Fresh and Clean hiding Achille Motors, the yellow boat of Richard Carr, the green boat of Paul Pico, and John Clark on the far side ready to go. But certainly not seeming ready to go, Damiano Spelter in GB Pedrini. And the rest of the pack will leave him behind as they get away in a spectacular start to the Allied Leisure Cowes Classic 1991. The early leaders probably much as expected. Championship leader Angelo Spelter in the blue and white Fresh and Clean boat trying to get an early edge on the faster petrol engine machines. And Polly's black SDA boat right alongside. And chasing gallantly behind Marston Hotels in Class 2. And also Debenhams here for its first race of the season, but obviously hoping for much rougher conditions in that monohull. Getting going at last, Damiano Spelter in GB Pedrini with a lot of ground to make up. Already the front of the field being set. Fresh and Clean, chasing head-to-head with the Paul Pico boat. Edoardo Polly looking a little bit slower in the SDA boat. Setting the pace as they left the Solent was Antonio Giuffredi in that green and white Paul Pico boat, but also looking likely to be a front runner, the white iceberg boat of Norberto Ferretti, and right behind him the Achille Motors boat, driven by last year's winner Domenico Achille. Dropping back a little now, Angelo Spelter, leader in the European Championships and aiming for a top 3 finish here to virtually clinch the title. His main weapon will be the reliability of his Fraschini diesels, but he knew there'd be no match for the top speed of the petrol engines in Iceberg, or indeed the powerful factory Lamborghini engines in Baguta. Sitting on the throttles, Steve Curtis, badly needing a win here to give him a chance of clinching the championship from Spelter in the last race of the season in Guernsey. As they turned towards Bournemouth and Poole Bay, Curtis was turning up the power, preparing to challenge Giuffredi in the Paul Pico boat for the lead. Giuffredi with the advantage for the moment, with Curtis prepared to wait a little longer in second, it seemed. Norberto Ferretti was hanging on their heels in third place as best he could. And the flat conditions were also suiting Domenico Achille in fourth with his red Achille Motors. Still heavy with fuel, but building up speed now to over 90 miles an hour. The pace was becoming a little hot for Angelo Spelter in fresh and clean, dropping to fifth. But after that remarkably slow start, his son Damiano in the grey boat on the left was charging to the head of the chasing group. A group which included the bewinged monohull of Andreas Ugland. Those wings designed to help lift the heavy centre of the boat off the water, thus reducing drag, thus increasing speed. Powered by 3 Sea-Tech diesels, this remarkable new monohull was certainly capable of giving the catamarans a run for the money, especially if the seas were to get a little rougher later in the race. A little rougher conditions would also suit the boat of Richard Carr in Cougar Lamborghini. He still had Ugland in sight, and this was part of his race plan, to take it easier in the opening stretches of the race while the boat was still heavy with fuel. Powerful Lamborghini motors would certainly come into their own later on, when the boat would be over 1 ton lighter. For now, he would have to be patient and prepared to wait for his opportunity for the Cougar cap to pounce. Meanwhile, the second part of this Allied Leisure Cows Classic weekend was beginning. This was a race for the smaller classes, 4 litres, 2 litres and 1.3. It was to run over a shortened version of the main race course, but with still over 90 miles of racing ahead of them, this was not going to be an easy option. Likely winners would come from the 4 litre pack. Jeff Purves in Hospitality Inn on the far side, and the Alpina Racing Team in D97. Already lurking on the near side, Richard Strutton in D32, who was likely to be the toughest rival for Jeff Purves in D6 Hospitality Inn. And he was making sure he got the fastest start possible as he headed off towards Poole. It was also going to be a tough event for the boats in the 2 litre class, and especially the monohulls. They were making a quick charge right at the start to try and get ahead of the catamarans, who were going to benefit from the calm water later in the race. Meanwhile, back at the front, there were major developments. The Paul Pico boat had stopped in the very same Poole Bay that the smaller boats were heading for. And also in problems and stopped, Eduardo Polli with the SDA boat. And that meant at this stage there could only be one leader. Norberto Ferretti in the Iceberg boat was still trying to hang on, but now Steve Curtis was losing fuel, making the boat lighter, and the Cougar catamaran was really flying as they headed down towards Weymouth. But two contenders who were not going to give up easily were Domenico Achilli and Norberto Ferretti. It was going to be a long race, and they were going to wait their chance to catch up the Gutta and take the trophy. Certainly Domenico Achilli in the red boat had his eyes set on taking the trophy 2 years running. And as they headed across Weymouth Bay, looking out in the mist for Portland Bill, Domenico Achilli was bringing the boat up to full speed. With all their attention taking in this head-to-head battle, little did they realise that coming from behind, Damiano Spelter had a few surprises in store for them. He certainly had the GB Petrini boat now on full song. And being in foreign waters, he'd also taken the precaution of employing English tacticians who knew the route and were now following him every step of the way by helicopter. Their advice was about to prove invaluable as he set off across Weymouth Bay, chasing the leaders. But that team advice was no longer any use to his father Angelo. Blown engines, perhaps pushed too hard to keep up, but also blown chances of clinching that European title. Now he'd have to wait to see how his rivals fared. Rivals such as Giulio Boffi in the Fratelli Rossetti boat. Fourth in the championships behind Spelter, his son Damiano and Curtis, but having seen fresh and clean stop, he knew a good result here would put him in strong championship contention. So he was taking it a little easier as he set off across Weymouth Bay. Ensuring they reached the finish line had paid off for them more than once this season, as hard charges ahead of them had broken. Now throttleman Angelo DeRiso was keeping an eye on the dials of the diesel engines every step of the way. They also had their eye on Damiano Spelter in the GB Petrini boat ahead of them, who seemed to be taking a more direct route across the bay than the leaders, thanks to his acquired local knowledge. Boffi was following him on the exact same course. On the horizon they could see the advantage they were gaining on the Achilli Motors boat and the Iceberg boat. In the enclosed cockpit of the Gutta, Steve Curtis was oblivious to it all as he headed for Portland Bill Lighthouse. He was first there, but little did he realise the navigational coup that Damiano Spelter in GB Petrini had pulled off to bring himself right back into contention and into second place ahead of the Iceberg boat and ahead of Domenico Achilli, still battling it out now for third and fourth place. Now they were going to be heading across the toughest part of the course, right across Lyme Bay. For Steve Curtis, these were almost home waters, and he confidently pushed the Gutta boat harder and harder towards Torquay. If Damiano Spelter had the advantage of surprise, it was soon lost as Steve Curtis saw him approaching in the small wing mirrors Now battle was fully engaged. And Curtis, lying third in the championship, needing a win to take him to the top of the table, was certainly not going to give up his first place easily. This was going to be a head-to-head battle that would go all the way to Torquay. But as Spelter took off in his own direction once again, little did either realise what the fog bank ahead of them held in store. Fog, the powerboat driver's worst enemy, and halfway across Lyme Bay, the large fog bank lay there like a huge shroud. The drivers had to guess how thick it might be, and when caution might be a better part of valour. For Achille and Ferretti, still locked in battle for third and fourth places, they were hoping it was just a temporary discomfort. The new rules, introducing enclosed cockpits, have brought increased safety for crews in the case of a high-speed crash. But they also bring reduced visibility, and that's the last thing a crew needs in these conditions. Now those who know their electronic navigation equipment best will come into their own. The Fratelli Rossetti boat, of Giulio Boffi behind them, still had the shock to come, as did Richard Carr in the Cougar Lamborghini. His plan had been to reach Portland Bill and then to really start opening the boat up and test the full power of the twin Lamborghinis. And right on time he did just that as he set off across Lyme Bay. First victim was to be the Fiat Uno monohull of Andreas Öglen. Carr's race plan seemed to be running almost perfectly to schedule. He was increasing speed as the fuel load lightened and beginning a long calculated run that, if he timed it right, would see him up among the leaders as they raced back towards Cowes. Little did Carr and his driver Peter Currington realise that everyone's race plans were about to be thrown on the scrap heap. And this was to become a race of simple survival. Ahead of them, conditions were getting worse, and Domenico Achille started as slow as the fog became almost impenetrable. Far distance, the other side of Lyme Bay. All Domenico had to do was find it. While there were gaps still opening up, he seemed determined to push ahead so that his main rival, Roberto Ferretti in the iceberg boat, could not gain advantage in the mud. Torquay was sitting in the clear, but first Domenico had to find the lower mark at Paynton before he could turn north towards Torquay and then back looking for Cowes. Fortunately, he wasn't the only boat who seemed to be all over the place, and he turned south, desperately trying to find the gate at Paynton that he had to make if he was not to be disqualified from the race. It was easy for the helicopters to see the right direction, but for Domenico Achille and many of the other boats, this was like being in a maze with a blindfold on. For Domenico, the problem was only being lost. For others, it was much more serious. Steve Curtis and his partner Vincenzo Polli had survived, but the boat certainly had not. They'd run past the lower marks at Paynton, and then in the fog ploughed straight up the rocks, narrowly escaping a much more serious disaster. Try as he might, there was going to be no place to hide for Steve Curtis. And also finding the land in the way, Andreas Ugland in his very expensive monohull. In the fog on the left was the painter mark. On the right, Torquay, and the turning mark there in clear air. All they had to do was find it. In the end, first out of the fog was Domenico Achilli, now in clear air and determined to make up for the lost half hour or more that he'd suffered in the fog bank. Damiano Spelter in the GB Pedrini boat was still in there somewhere, but next out was Norberto Ferretti in the Iceberg boat. Once again, hot on the heels of Achilli. With 90 miles still to go to Cowes, the personal battle between these two boats was set to go all the way. Going this way, Lyme Bay was certainly a lot more pleasant. And running now at over 110 miles an hour, Domenico Achilli are past the Portland Bill Lighthouse with some relief. But right on his tail, and still not giving up, was the Iceberg boat. And not far behind them, Marco Capaferri in the Cyreg boat. He'd taken the time to find the marks and now was gaining the benefits of a comfortable third place. Giulio Boffi in the Fratelli Rossetti boat had also taken his time and was thankful for it. He now had a comfortable fourth place. And in the fog, had got round and come ahead of Damiano Spelter in GB Pedrini, despite all the help of aerial tacticians. It would need a remarkable performance from Damiano Spelter if he was to think about winning this race now. But at least his present position would secure him a lead at the top of the European Championship table. And charging right behind him was coming Richard Carr, determined to show what his new team could do when put up against the might of the Italians. He'd slowed to almost a stop in the fog and made sure he'd cornered all the marks. But now he was having the fun of opening up the Cougar Lamborghini to gain its top speed. He was certainly relieved to see Portland Bill, and probably at that stage didn't know he was in sixth place. Crossing the tidal race just after Portland Bill, we started to see the conditions that Richard Carr would probably prefer for this Cougar Lamborghini catamaran. slicing quickly and smoothly through the rougher water. These are certainly the sort of conditions he'll be hoping for as he takes on the Italians at the World Championships. For now, though, his sights were set on getting home to Cowes as fast and as safely as possible. Poole and Bournemouth Bay was another welcome sight. But not so welcome was another glimpse of a smaller fog bank creeping towards the shore ahead of him. Nature was playing one last trick on the offshore powerboaters. And it was one last trick Domenico Achilli could have done without. Whether it was engine problems or being lost in the fog again, he wasn't saying. But those vital few minutes that he was stopped in the fog bank gave his nearest rival, Norberto Ferretti, the chance to clinch the race. This was the first year for this new boat in Class 1 offshore powerboat racing. And for Norberto Ferretti, Luca Ferrari and Gilberto Grassi, this was going to be a very proud moment indeed. This had been one of the toughest Cowes Classics ever, and Norberto Ferretti had beaten more than just his competitors to win the title.
It's much more difficult to get a big cat around safely and quickly, so they take a wide...
And after around 200 miles of racing, that finish line looked very welcoming for Giulio Buffi in the Fratelli Rossetti Belmont Cat. He'd taken it more calmly than most, and now he was getting his rewards. Though not far behind was Marco Capiveri in the Cyreg boat to take third place. And running sadly down behind them, Domenico Achilli, the final mistake having cost him victory and forced him into fourth place.
The way in which the boat was run, they're coming home in a strong second place. We've now got four boats in our sights. We've got the second place.
Italian domination once again of this great race. And a very happy Norberto Ferretti, having been responsible also for building the boat. But Richard Carr, in a fine fifth place after the Pedrini boat had finally broken, was showing that there was a new British team who were ready to take on the Italians in the World Championships later in the year. There had been a hero's welcome for Norberto Ferretti and his crew in the Iceberg boat, but now there was an even bigger and more patriotic welcome awaiting Richard Carr, who lives only across the water in Poole, and his driver Peter Currington, who works at the Cougar factory in Southampton where the boat was built. The end of the Allied Leisure Cowes Classic, and Richard Carr and his driver Peter Currington had spent 6 months taking this new boat from the drawing board to the start line of this great classic. In the toughest first test imaginable, 5th place was a great performance, and most of Cowes were out to tell him so.
Well, it was a very difficult race. When we got to about 20 miles east of Torquay, we ran into a very thick fog bank, and we spent about an hour and a half looking for 2 marks. The visibility was down to about 200 yards, which obviously was very dangerous. I would be surprised if they found all the marks, but I can't comment. I don't know.
Well, we have heard that it's quite likely they did not find all the marks, and I suppose we will hear about that later on today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we spent the time finding the marks, and I think that's why it took us so long to get back. But generally, the race was going very well for everyone. It was a bit of a strange sea on the way down, very gluey. A lot of boats weren't getting a lot of lift. And then we ran into the fog, as I say, and obviously that was the problem we all had.
Well, we hear that a couple of the boats actually ran aground in Paynton.
Yeah, well, I think some people were rather foolish, actually. As soon as we ran into the fog, we stopped, because I knew there was a few boats in front of me, and what concerned me is that they turned round 180 degrees in Torquay, and then we would be approaching at 100 miles an hour, and they'd be coming the other way at 100 miles an hour. With 100 yards visibility, wouldn't be too impressive, I don't think.
Not much fun. Did you enjoy the race, though, generally?
It's a very long race. It's a tough race. Yeah, I think that yeah, it was quite enjoyable. Big challenge, and I'm glad to be back here in one piece.
And does it make a difference having the Italians as your competition rather than the English competition? Which
I enjoy having the Italian. I mean, the Italians. Some of the Italian boats are a lot faster than this boat. This boat wasn't designed for flat waters. It was designed really for rough weather, and today's conditions weren't suitable really for this boat. But I think, in spite of that, with less power than what they've currently got, we've done very well, I think.
So a bit of careful navigating may have won the day, as far as
well, local waters, to me, I think, which did benefit us in certain times. And I mean, Torquay was tough finding those marks, but we got there.
There's a lot been happening out there. Eduardo, could we start with your story of the race, how it went?
Well, mine is a short story. Started off fairly well. We were in a good position, in 4th position. But just past the Bay of Poole, so really we broke something in the transmission. I just got back, as a matter of fact, after 6 hours. And that's it. That's a very fast and quick story.
So we obviously saw you with that problem with the rudders. Was that anything to do with it? Or
No, nothing to do with the rudders. The rudders were, the boat was not at its best, evidently, but we could manage. It was decently okay. We had some other problems.
And have you heard what's happened to Leonardo yet? His adventures?
I heard not yet, because I just got back, so I'm going to hear it in a short while.
Leonardo, can you tell us what happened with your race?
Well, actually, everything was very fine until getting close to Torquay, to the Torquay Bay, and where it was very foggy, and we couldn't see anything. We just drove in the fog. And at a certain point, I said, I mean, we must be there. We must be close to the land. And at a certain point, there was a rock, a big rock. And we just took the gas down, and we steered, and we missed the rock for a few meters because we really couldn't see anything. And then we went out with pretty good no speed, trying to look for the boys, the 2 gates. We finally managed to get them after half an hour. We turned the gates, and then the Torquay boy, and then back to Cowes. It was okay, but it was incredible fun. I mean, I saw boats on the rocks everywhere. I saw the.
Can you tell us who you saw?
Well, I saw the Ugland, the Norwegian boat. I saw my brother with Steve, with the Baguta on the rocks as well. And then I couldn't see anything else because, I mean, it was so foggy that it was even difficult to see that.
Well, look up. How was your race? Good race?
Good race, yes. Very difficult for the fog near the Turkish. About 15 minutes for go and 15 minutes for return. It's very dangerous. Very dangerous, yes. But we have not a problem with the boat. Very speed boat.
Very well.
Very well.
It was your first season with this boat, yes?
Guarda che non è ancora pronto da mangiare. Very good GPS navigator for arrive in Turkish.
All right.
We gather that 2 boats actually went onto the beach at Paynton, and you didn't see any of that? Or?
No, we didn't see it. I mean, at Paynton, the fog was really thick. I mean, we actually saw houses in front of us when we were flying this helicopter, and we decided that was the time to sort of stop being a bit silly in the helicopter and go above it and
wait until people came out of the fog. You know, we absolutely frightened ourselves silly. I think going in the boats would be a lot safer. But there was the Uglan boat apparently hit a tanker that was lying in the bay at Torquay, and then they subsequently went aground, which seems to be compounding the situation a bit. Steve Curtis, they went aground on rocks, which I can understand, making a landfall in those conditions. You know, if you're going at any speed, it was so thick that you wouldn't have had time to see if there were rocks appeared up ahead of you.
So it's not a beach, it's rock.
I'm told it's rocks, yeah,
right.
but they were seen clambering ashore from it, so I think they're okay. SDA went aground on the shingles, which was a bit reckless of them, because I mean they were in clear visibility. It's high tide. There isn't much of the shingles that you can go aground on, so they did a pretty good job of choosing the right spot there, I think. You know, it's a mess, this race. It really is. A lot of boats retired, and you know, it's perfect up until this fog came in at Torquay, and then it all went haywire. Everybody seemed to go crazy and not know. It's a very hard mark to find in the fog because it's away from the land in the mark in Torquay. Very hard one to find, and so it was very difficult. And I was glad I wasn't navigating, but you see, these guys refused to use the electronics. If they'd had electronics, they could have gone straight to that mark, come around there smiling, and come out the other end. And you could win the race if you did that.
Well, certainly the Iceberg Ferretti team agree with that, putting their victory down to trustworthy electronics. And they've certainly come out the other side smiling. For them, the first victory of the European offshore powerboat year, but obviously not the last. It's certainly a victory they'll remember for a very long time, and in their case, for the right reasons. We leave you now with an official roundup of results of the Allied Leisure Cowes Classic 1991. An encouraging result for Richard Carr and the Cougar Lamborghini team in their build-up to those World Championships in Trieste in Italy later this year. You can follow the team's progress exclusively on Sky Sports every week here on Water Sports World.